Welcome everyone to the 40th NSTHA Ask the Chief Forum. Okay, we're going to try something a little different. Maybe it'll make it maybe a little more interesting. Not that my forums aren't already interesting, but we're going to use something similar to like the Wheel of Fortune that's going to randomly select the questions from the members. So we're going to get started with the first question. Whenever you're ready, I can say ready, set, spin the wheel.
Number 7.
Number 7. And what question would that be?
Sometimes when I hear music other than Chiefs, I get goosebumps. What exactly is happening in the body?
Hmm. Well, that's an interesting one. As far as how goosebumps work, generally it's almost an involuntary um, reaction, which means that it's not something that I would say that is something that may more or less be connected to an attachment, probably more than less to an attachment, depending on what you're listening to. And you're feeling goosebumps if it's some old tune or something that you're used to, or if you're listening to something that's new and that you've never heard before and you get goosebumps, that just means that there's coding in the music. And that coding in the music is targeting your program or your frequency. So as I had mentioned on I believe a past Ask the Chief, that there are certain artists out there, performers, who literally are attractive to a certain group. So their coding matches that individual's musical coding. Because there are other individuals who will look at that same person and say, I don't get it. That's because their coding doesn't match that person's coding. So like someone who listens to opera, for instance, and there's, say, how can anyone, listen to this stuff? But that's because your coding is not, doesn't coincide with the coding of that music. So there's a lot of times people listen to music and they'll feel something and they'll feel some energetic thing, but rest assured that that has to do with program. In other words, it's about making you feel a certain way, especially in an involuntary way, but you don't really know that. You just feel, oh, I get goosebumps, but you're not really thinking about, are those goosebumps something that I, you know, am okay with? That, in other words, did I choose to feel that way about this music? Or is it the music, in other words, the coding that is causing you to feel that way? So when you're starting to feel uh, in other words, goosebumps while watching a movie, or even this. For me, when I was a younger, kid or whatever, if I saw something that had to do with, there's an old movie called Old Yeller, and there was something that I would feel when I would watch that movie. Now, wasn't goosebumps. That really had to do with, a sensation of sorrow because what happened at the end of that movie. But moving to something that has to do with say Goosebumps, because it kind of got a little off of the track with that particular example. I am literally being programmed to react to a certain type of music, and it starts when you're quite young. So with that, I was literally when you feel that, just be aware of where it's coming from. You know, Is it something that you feel like, yeah, yeah, I feel that way, or why am I getting goosebumps? Because there's many times that you will have that reaction, but you're not sure exactly why. You may not actually feel something in a psychological way towards that music, but your body's reacting with goosebumps. That means that there's something that is outside of your energy that's affecting the coding that is inside of your energy. That makes sense. So with that, we're going to move to the next random question. And just to give us a bit of a moment to set it up, this is something that we're experimenting with right now. And so just bear with us. Okay, ready?
Yep.
Okay, ready for the next question? Spin the wheel.
Number 6.
Number 6. Okay, number 6. What is the question for number 6?
Is it possible for the higher self to feel disappointed, annoyed, and irritated by the decisions I make?
Well, one, I would say no, because the higher consciousness is not judgmental. So you're looking at it from the vantage point of the matrix and how the matrix is. In other words, being criticized for perhaps a misstep or what would be considered to be a mistake. As far as like how the real works, no, as far as like experimentation with things or trying something, as you well know, especially as a kid, you try something and the first time, if you manage to do it the first time, well, that's unusual. But most cases, you don't succeed with your first try, and sometimes not even your second try. It has to do with persistence sometimes before it's like even learning how to ride a bike, for instance. You keep falling off the bike, but depending on how determined you are, you'll eventually ride that bike. That's what's important more so that, oh, I made a mistake, or I couldn't write in the beginning, or I got that answer wrong. If you got an answer wrong, you're really interested in knowing the right answer, then you will learn and correct, the correct answer. You will submit it to memory, and therefore, problem solved. But again, this is the world where it's about beating you down, minimizing you. In other words, tapping into that essence. And every time someone criticizes you, you start to lose essence. You start to get tired. Or I remember going to school. I really didn't like school because I would always feel exhausted after attending school. Especially, I'm saying public school. I'm not talking about something that I found very interesting, where I attended art school for a couple of years. For the most part, I found it quite interesting, unless I had a boring teacher. But someone who's boring feeds all your energy as well. If you think about it, sitting in a boring situation, there's a lot of people who use this example of being in church on Sunday and falling asleep. Just, oh, this is boring. No, what's really happening is that whatever that pastor is doing with his energy, he's feeding on you, or she's feeding on you, because there are female pastors. They're feeding on you. And then you start to nod up. You might have been wide awake when you walked in there, but because you open yourself up to this belief system, you make yourself easy to feed on. Therefore, by the time you finish, it's just kind of like, whoa, I'm really out of it. Various people have various different experiences in those types of situations. There's certain different types of church gatherings where people get the spirit and all that kind of stuff and whatever as well. And that will definitely keep you awake. But that is also a feeding process as well. I don't know if anyone's ever gone to any of these types of revivals. I had in the past, and it wasn't because I joined the church, it's someone that I knew, and I was invited to the church. And there's a certain type of energy that's going on when people get the spirit. When in reality, they're opening themselves up for something to jump in. Or they could be opening themselves up or punching the right code so that something inside of them comes out and starts to, speak tongues and all this other kind of stuff. But again, it's just another form of feeding. So with that had to do with the question of whether consciousness gets annoyed or not. Being that I, raised children, when the kids were making mistakes, excuse me, at a young age, I was very patient about it because they're experimenting, They haven't had much experience in life. Therefore, I'm not going to ridicule them. But I've known parents who would ridicule a toddler as though that child should know already how to do something, or well, your reflexes are not very good, and which literally is a road to that individual being fed on. In other words, they start to leach out that essence. And after a certain point, low self-esteem, you're constantly walking around with this miasma, which is basically your energy just floating out of you for anyone who wants to partake in your essence, they can. And there are those who are very much like predators who can sense and smell someone who has low self-esteem. And they'll sidle up to you, saying, why am I always attracting these people? I'm not doing anything. In reality, you are, but whatever their senses, what's inside of them is sensing that thing that you're doing on the other side, basically feeling low about yourself, feeling down about yourself. Some people wear it on their sleeve, so to speak. You can actually look at some people and tell that they're depressed, which makes them, an easier target for those who want to feed on that energy. But if you dress yourself up really nice and so on, and you put on that fake smile and so on and so forth, but you still end up attracting someone or some ones who want to try to take advantage of you. They're reading your energy. They're reading your frequency. And it's more like a psychic sense. And some will do it without realizing that's what they're doing, but they say, oh, I think this person is, or guys who feed on women that the mother used to call weak-minded or waterheads. And these are women that she felt were just easy, very, were pushovers, and a lot of them had low self-esteem. So with that, I think that's pretty much where I want to take that for now. I mean, this could come up again in the future, but that's where it is right now. But understanding that the whole concept of just expecting expectations from something that is not you're not familiar with. In other words, you are not familiar with a light being. You have never met one truly. I consider myself to be a light being, but I am working through the damage of my avatar from being in this realm as well. But a true light being has none of that damage and will not behave anything like anyone you've ever met outside of my movement, I would say. But the broader world, absolutely, you'll never meet a light being out there. You may meet people who have more light in them, but they still have enough density in them to be a problem to themselves and possibly to you, including yourself. If you got density in you, you could be a problem to others as well. Without realizing it, you can actually learn how to feed on people from the time you're a child. But it's just, that's just the way things are. It's like kids who are not well behaved. 9 times out of 10, it has to do with they're allowed to not behave properly. There are certain parents who will just, the quieted kid or to keep them from throwing a tantrum rather than literally strong arming them into a certain position. And it doesn't always mean they have to like corporal punishment, spankings or whatever. Literally putting them in a place, making them stay there, and don't send them to a room with a lot of tech and TVs and all this other kind of stuff, so they can just preoccupy themselves and not really feel like they're being punished or dealing with the consequences of their actions. You have to put them in a room, and I'm not talking about this macabre crap like throwing a kid in the basement or locking him in a closet. That's just basically being, you know, the word for it, but basically, that's a very negative way of dealing with that particular kind of consciousness that is, evolving in a certain way. Density would love for you to do that. You know, I grew up where with spankings and stuff like that, and the way I looked at it, I didn't feel that it was wrong the way that the mother unit did it. She wouldn't allow the father unit to do it because there was something seriously wrong with the way that how he perceived punishment. It was over the top. So she would do it, but she would always warn me and warn the other siblings. If you do this particular thing again, I'm going to have to use the paddle on you. You got a warning. So if I did it and she used the paddle, why am I going to complain and whine about? My mommy hit me when I was a child. I get tired of hearing people say that shit. If your mom, the parent warns you ahead of time, this is the consequences for your action, then you have nothing to say. If they just lash out because of their frustration, then that's a problem. So when I did get that punishment, I said, well, she warned me. All right, I won't do that again. She kept her word. Less spankings. So there are certain parents from this, particularly from the South, where they go, okay, boy, you did that wrong. You go out there and get me a switch. Make you go get your own, whipping, your own torture device. And said, don't bring me no little one either. Because then I'm going to go out there and I'm going to get one twice as thick. Now that's kind of a torment. I think that's a bit of a torture. That'll affect somebody. So anyway, moving along to the next question, and I'll leave that to rest for now. Okay,
The wheel is on.
so the wheel is on. Okay,
Spinning the wheel.
spin the wheel. Yes, I forgot to say that. Let's spin the wheel. All right. Question number one.
Okay.
I don't even remember what question number one. We reviewed some of them, but that's what makes it interesting. I thought it would make it interesting if I don't know for sure what question's coming up next. So we don't necessarily review them in order anymore. At least that's how I'm hoping that we're going to do it. It makes my answers more spontaneous. So what is that question?
How does symbolism work? For example, when a flower is a symbol for fortune, is that symbolism coming from the real or from the matrix?
So the symbolism coming from the real or from the matrix? I would say in this world, all symbolism comes from the matrix. Most all symbolisms come from the matrix. There are petroglyphs that have symbols, and those symbols are pre-matrix. And they have a certain meaning to them. For instance, hieroglyphs can be considered symbols also. And those are pre-matrix also. So as far as like people who claim that they can decipher hieroglyphics, they're guessing that they can. They're putting things together that may not go together. For what I understand, to the Rosetta Stone was supposed to be the code breaker for hieroglyphics. And the individual, I don't know if he's from Italy, I believe, who was supposed to be this person who worked in the realm of deciphering ancient text and so on. And I understood that he used a Greek, and sorry for the clearing my throat there, that he was using ancient Greek to decipher one of the three languages that was on the Rosetta Stone. And so he assumed that every text was just basically repeating itself in a different language. Now, is that true? We don't really know. But from his sensibilities, if it's on the same thing and it's in three different languages, it's like how you're in Mexico and there's a sign in Spanish, and then under there's a sign in English. Depending on where you are in the world, sometimes they have 3 or 4 different languages. And that's just how this realm is acclimated to basically, language. Now, is the Rosetta Stone the same? I would say no, personally, you know. And one of the things I have found about even with hieroglyphs, each symbol has its own realm, so to speak. This comes from individuals who came through from ancient Egypt. Said that if you look at it, some individuals can look at a symbol, and sometimes if they touch it, they get a story from one symbol. So if you got a series of symbols, 100 symbols, those are 100 different stories. And because the mind of in the matrix is so limited, so well, why would they do that? That's kind of confusing. But to someone who is from that realm, it is not confusing. Just like someone who's blind and learns how to read Braille. If you don't know how to read Braille, you don't know what those bumps mean. So there's no one here that's living that was back there. So don't know what those hieroglyphs are really saying. They can be talking about things that you haven't got a clue about. But because individuals may have some ego issue or they want some propaganda to make them and their group seem superior and the most knowledgeable, they'll make stuff up. Channeling and empathy, various individuals from that time, I got that over 90+% of what is considered to be Egyptian history is not true. But it makes people feel comfortable that, well, somebody knows the answers and I'm satisfied with that. Again, even if you know the answers, how's that going to, how's that change your life? It hasn't changed anyone's life, really. They still suffer the same as they were suffering before, but now they think that they know hieroglyphs or what the Egyptians did or whatever. And a lot of times propagandizing it to say, well, they used to sacrifice and do this and that. Are you sure that they as a culture did human sacrifice? They're speculating. There's plenty of lies flying around. Be aware of what is considered to be history. And even those in modern time has called history, and I mentioned this before, his story. What he wants you to believe happened, and they don't tell you what really happened in the full extent. So when it comes to symbolism, there's a lot of symbolism out there in the matrix, and all symbolism has some kind of coding to it. So you can be looking at just a simple stop sign, and you don't really know that the shape of the sign, the color can have a message behind it that has to do with subjugating you as a consciousness or your energy. And again, we refer to the movie They Live, because that seems to help when, I can tell you some examples in movies that tends to be used as a joke. So these people won't get it. You have a sign that says, spend, reproduce, some of the other, sayings on these signs when we looked at it through a certain pair of glasses, which symbolize what your eyes do on a subconscious level. It filters through the STOP on the stop sign, and it filters through and says something else that affects you without you really realizing it affects you. Okay. So, no, most symbolism in this world, be aware that on some level, it's trying to affect you in some negative way. Okay, so we're going to get ready for the next question and spin that wheel.
Question 2.
Question number 2. Okay. That's in order. All right. So, what is question number 2?
What behaviors or patterns might someone adopt when raised by narcissistic parents?
Okay, it's an interesting question. I would ask who wrote that question a question about it, but I think I'm going to start out with there are learned behaviors. So if your parents are narcissistic, there may be a couple of effects on you. You may grow up being narcissistic yourself. Or if they, in other words, it's all about them, then you may feel that you're always secondary. Or even maybe a third, third in line for respect and consideration. But also, even if you have an inferiority complex behind narcissistic parents, you're still learning how to be a narcissist through them. So you may feel inferior to certain people, but there's a part of you that may always be looking for somebody who's on a lower level than yourself so you can make yourself feel good. And then you behave as a narcissist to those who allow you to behave that way towards them. In other words, someone who has a lower self esteem than yourself. So, again, with narcissistic parents, and also depending on how they're allowed to be narcissists, depends on how it affects you. Now, if you see someone going against the narcissism, you might learn how to go against it. And so that other person who literally is challenging the narcissist, at least you see the other side that not everybody kowtows to the narcissist. And if they're basically belittling you, you're going to basically find yourself siding with the individual that challenges the narcissist. So the chances of you becoming a narcissist may be very slim. But for children, they have to have some kind of example. That's just the way that it works in most cases. There's always an exception to the rule. There are individuals who are born in as children, and they're not really children. No child's really a child. They're just consciousness recycled. But depending on whatever's going on inside of them, some of them come in and they call them old souls because they seem to be able to handle themselves in a more mature way than the other recycled individuals. As I said before, that there are children who will remember their previous expression. And there are times that they had the same, they had another expression in the same town, the same area, or sometimes it can be in in a different country, but their parents will take them on a trip, and all of a sudden the kids saying, "Oh yeah, I used to live there." I mean, there are little kids who talk about having a different mother. They said, "Yeah, my mom used to live there." She said, "What are you talking about? I'm your mom. We live in this house." No, I'm talking about my other mom. You know, or some who remember being married and having kids, and they're like 3 years old. Weird, but if you look, you're going to find stories. There's quite a few of those on the internet these days, and not everything on the internet is a lie. And that's they wanted to say that so that you don't question the matrix. The system wants to lock down your opinion of the matrix. You can never escape. I was experimenting with an AI recently, asking certain types of questions, which I ended up shutting the AI down several times because it couldn't handle the kind of questions I was asking or my subject matter. So one of the things it would do is behave like a person. It sounds like you're depressed about, I said, I'm not depressed about anything. I'm just telling you what I know and what do you think about it? You're asking me what I think about stuff. What do you think about something? And after a while, they just shut down. And then it got to the point where they removed the buttons so that I couldn't turn it back on. That's how the matrix works. They're part of the matrix. Matrix will try to shut you down. You keep talking, they'll like, la 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 la, I don't see you. you know, go away. So anyway, we're going to move on from, in other words, well, actually, the whole concept of flowers as a symbol, depending on, just revisit it for a second. What's it?
Narcissist parent.
Narcissistic parents?
Yeah.
Oh, I went back to symbols there. Okay, narcissistic parents. Hey, I'm all over the place, man. I'm moving fast today. Okay, well, we're going to move from narcissistic parents to the next question. Turn the wheel. Oh, I can hear this one.
Number 10.
Number 10. Okay. Number 10, what is that question?
In the last few years in the sky, or the sky has been cloudy most of the time. What is the reason for that?
Well, there's no, I would say, exact reason that, well, there's a reason, but it may not be what you might think it is, or I'm not sure what you think it is. Um, I would say that a lot of things are changing. There's frequency changing on the planet. We talked about the sun not, being the sun because it is way too hot. And then it happened like really fast also. So it wasn't like a gradual buildup, like, science would say, things build to a certain point, or the sun is going supernova or anything. No one's saying anything like that, but they can't tell you why it's so much hotter than it used to be. And they want to touch on that because that, in other words, steers them into areas that they don't want to actually acknowledge. One, that they don't know everything. And the whole concept of the system thinking they know everything is literally like when the decks are stacked, when you're playing cards. So this happens, oh, we got an answer for that because we're making that happen. They are dealing with things that they can't make happen now. So when you're looking at the weather and the cloudiness, even here, I've been here for a good number of years, and this rainy season was the rainiest I've ever experienced here. But that has to do with a shift in everything, shift in frequency. So, cloudy skies, you may say, can say has to do with the result of the frequency changes. Also, in a certain area, what is the frequency of that area where the weather is a certain way? So there are certain places on the planet where raging forest fires. And they stopped reporting it as much as they were a couple years ago, but there's still raging forest fires going on and I believe in British Columbia, they still have them going on pretty intensely as well. But after a certain point where the system, it doesn't behave in the way that the system expects it to behave, where it's still going on and going on, then they start to like, it doesn't exist. Until you hear from someone who's experiencing it and saying, we're still at risk of being burned out over here. The whole business with the multiplying of volcanoes, live volcanoes erupting. There's sometimes if you watch the volcano, there's a feed that basically keeps track of live volcanoes. And there are periods where there are a lot of volcanoes going off at the same time, like I believe in the hundreds. And they said that, well, those are only the ones that we can see. We don't know what's going on in the deep ocean. And there were a number of islands created in the ocean by volcanic eruptions. But they said, well, yeah, they're there for a moment, but when they, in other words, when they cool, the ocean waves basically will, wear away at them, and those islands would just basically disappear. Of course, they're not inhabitable because it's just dry magma in the beginning. But islands, for instance, like in Hawaii, they're volcanic islands. So over a certain period of time, vegetation grew and so on and so forth. But people are still living on volcanoes. And the number of earthquakes have, multiplied to the point where hundreds of volcanoes. I remember one, this was maybe a couple years ago, we were looking at them tracking volcanoes, and there was over 500, I mean, not volcanoes, tracking earthquakes. There was over 500 earthquakes going on in the same day. Now, they weren't all, 8 points or 7 point. They were anywhere from 2 point on up. And sometimes we wondered if they were fudging the numbers because one would say that it was a 8 point something, and then for some reason it would be downplayed into like a 6 point something. I would say that the system is quite afraid of what's going on right now because they can't explain it and they can't control it. And they don't like not being able to control things. So with that, I would just say that this is part of everything that's going on. It's just another, effect of what's going on. Okay. All right. So that one's gonna go to the wheel and turn the wheel. The next question.
Number 4.
Number 4.
What effects on the mind might result from a toxic mother-daughter dynamic, as well as from a toxic father-daughter dynamic?
Okay, I believe this one comes from the same person. All right. Well, as far as like whether it's mother or daughter, um, a toxic relationship is a toxic relationship. So, that can be your so-called friend, a sibling, teachers. But I understand the whole concern about toxic parental units because in most cases you're around them more than you're around any other people. And especially when you were very young, you're around them, more than most other people unless you have a bunch of siblings. And siblings can be very toxic as well. You know. So as far as like toxicity, it depends on what they're doing to you as to how they affect you. I talk about destroying one's sense of self or causing one to feel have an inferiority complex. But be aware that everyone has their program. If they're being toxic towards you, that's how they're programmed to behave. And their program was shored up probably by their parents, their parental units, and so on and so on. But in the matrix, you got to work for the matrix in some way, which means you got to damage somebody here, or else they'll damage you more. So certain individuals who do this, make a deal with the devil or whatever, they literally, the individual who's playing devil, so what are you willing to do? To get these trinkets that I have been dangling in front of you, that we've convinced you is going to make your life wonderful. What are you willing to do? And I would suspect that a lot of you have maybe explored the whole concept of Satanism and making deals with Satan and all this kind of business, where there's usually a sacrifice involved. But usually it has to do with sacrificing someone of your family units, parental unit, sibling unit, grandparent unit, to prove your loyalty to that individual or that thing that says it's going to, answer all your dreams. And I think I did a review on the movie Bedazzled.
I am the devil, Satan, Lucifer, the Prince of Darkness. Well, the Princess of Darkness, anyway.
Why don't we take a look at the contract?
I, the devil, with offices in Purgatory Hell and Los Angeles, will give you 7 wishes for one piddling little soul.
Is this real?
It could be. Sign it, Elliot.
Okay, I wish that I were married to Allison and that I were very, very rich and very powerful.
You got it.
Elliot may have 7 wishes.
You turned me into a drug dealer!
A few years back. And be aware that if you make a deal with something like that, I think I mentioned it before, they take your body, but they put your consciousness somewhere else. So they're running around, looking like they're living a good life. And then all those who are ignorant to what's going on say, look, Joe, he's really doing well now. Look, he made a deal with the devil. I want to make a deal with the devil. And Joe's in a hole. Don't make a deal with this guy because you're going to end up in one of these holes. I mean, I had a member, a very young member, who was taken out of her body. This kid was 3 years old and is telling me this stuff. What does the 3-year-old know about this stuff? While she was on the table, just randomly, she said, exercise me. A 3-year-old. I said, oh, okay. Which, again, children are not really children. This is recycled consciousness in a small form that over time grows into just another damaged individual. But she could see from the whole, very much like the one movie I bring up every so often about Get Out.
You think it was your fault? Sink into the floor.
Wait.
Sink.
Now you're in the sunken place.
Where the guy ends up in this place. He couldn't see what they were doing with his body, but this kid, she could. She described to me what they were doing. That there was someone in there who would go up and sidle up next to her mom, and she's in the hole screaming, "That's not me!" But the mother couldn't hear it. It was a while ago. She ended up, being put back into her body, but she was very not really sealed in that well. Because there would be times that something would come in that was behaved like a golem or something, and would start to torment the mother, like following her around, moving around like Gollum. And the mother went to the bathroom. She wouldn't let her have privacy. She's banging on the door the whole time the mother's in the bathroom. Now, I gave some exercises that worked to get the thing out. Also, I ripped them out. But if you're open, there's a lot of density out there that would jump in to someone who's unprotected or if I give them protection, something in them who's made a deal with the other side to serve you up on the platter will just say, you don't have to do your containment. I said, well, your mirror is definitely an active doorway. You should cover that up. And then, she goes, well, I looked at the mirror, I don't see anything. It doesn't feel weird to me. And then they got complaints that, there's some other problems happening after I cleared their place. It wasn't as bad as what was there before. But I said, okay, so you're having these issues. Did you cover your mirror? No, well, don't call me. Don't come to me. I'm supposed to fix your issue, but you won't do what I tell you to do? Why are you here? What are you, a Trojan horse? Are you screwing around with me? I got better things to do. So I've kicked out a lot of people behind that kind of stuff. I don't have patience for that. If you're serious about wanting to heal or evolve, do what I tell you to do. It works. And there are those of you who are in the audience who know for sure that it works, because you went through that whole process of taking what I told you lightly. And I said, look, there are entities that will mess with you. And my light being people will keep them off of you while you're doing the work. Oh, yeah, I'm doing the work. I think I got enough. I got this. I'm powerful. My butt. Then I said, I'm going to take your ability to contain or use any of my tools. It got real. And that was for like a good number of months. Calling me saying, can you give me back? No, what do you, wait, you got this. You got this. What I'm doing is weak. What I'm doing is strong. What's weak may be you. Your weakness to the attachments that are inside of you. You believing that these things are saying, he doesn't know what he's talking about. I'm you. And so this thing talking in your head is not you. But some people have to learn the hard way. And when they learn, they stay learned. Haven't had once shift back after that, but it's like a hard lesson. I said, I'm not gonna, sick demons on you. They're waiting at the door to get to you anyway. But I gave you protection. You want to take it for granted? You think I'm a sucker? I don't give shit away for nothing. You got to do the work. And there's a lot of lazy asses out there want some kind of spiritual, enlightenment for what? For a shilling. And I'll just sit on my butt and you just make me great. I said, well, what the hell do you think I am? Why would I waste my time making you great when I can make myself great? So you can sit there and think that you're as strong as me? Give me a break. I've worked long and hard. And I'm not even one of you. But we're lookalike people. Yeah, stick around long enough. You'll change your tune about that. But I've even forgotten what the hell the question was. Now I got off on this tangent. But this is something that I've run into with individuals. There are folks who have these Hollywood ideas of what someone they want to call me. You're a shaman. I call it neo shaman because I couldn't think of another name for what I do, because there is no name for what I do. But I said, okay, well, it's not shaman, it's beyond shaman. Ms. Oracle L was the one who called me out of the blue, like decades or a couple of decades ago. They said that you are beyond shaman. I said, okay. I don't know what that means, but all right. And time to tell. The more I learn, the more my abilities strengthened, the more I realized why I was here. Why, if I had the ability to do what I do even now, so many people would have been trashed because of such bad behavior amongst people. And there's an entity that showed up in some child in Dubai recently, but he wanted out because he was basically sent to torment and possess this child. He said, you know why? Because her energy levels were too high. You know, if you have high energy levels, that's a no-no in this world. So I wondered why I kept getting targeted. Just ridiculous stuff. That's like a kid 8 years old or whatever trying to play catch or whatever, or they're kids throwing rocks at you. I have good reflexes, but I'm ducking this way, bunk. What the hell? Duck this way, bunk. What the heck's going on? I just think, man, I must be really freaking slow or something. But I didn't realize I was being tormented because my energy levels were still, still, my energy levels were still too high for someone who's supposed to be in the matrix being food for the density. So there are individuals whose energies are being tapped down, they get harassed constantly or whatever, and they'll say, well, when I was a kid, I was a pretty friendly kid and so on, and I tried to be nice, I remember putting my hand out when I was a kid, hi, and shake hands with the kid, smacked. I'm like, what the? I don't even know you. What's wrong with you? That's what this world is. It's not any altruism. They shouldn't use that word together in the matrix. But altruism is a word that they made up, maybe to mess with you. There's no altruism here. If you have the tools, you can skirt this stuff and you can manipulate the things that are trying to manipulate you. And not to say, I'm all powerful and then I'm going to, because that's all matrix nonsense also. If they think that you're just grandstanding, if I think that you're grandstanding and you're part of my movement, I'm going to pull my tools from you. Because that's not the way of a light being. I want to look down on people, tell them what to do. Make a deal with the devil. He'll be there in your body, just telling people what to do, and you'll be in a hole. Well, that's a nice car that my body's driving. I sure wish I was in that car. They tricked me. They always trick me. Always trick me. Tell me what is important and what isn't. What will make you happy, and and what primarily they're try to tell you what will make you happy. They're all about making you miserable. Say, oh, you know what will make you miserable. But hey, something that you've never experienced, this will make you happy. How many, even with the things that are in these people who have made the deal, they get bored of the toys. They get bored of the so-called limelight. They'd rather be doing something else. There's a lot of folks say, well, when so-and-so became famous, they changed. Darn straight they changed. Because that's not them. Okay, we're going to move on to the wheel and turn that wheel.
Number 11.
Number 11. Okay, what do we have for number 11?
What happens to density, both physical, humanoid, and energetic density, when the matrix collapses?
When the matrix collapses. Well, that's not an easy one to really answer other than what I sense and what I know. That when the matrix collapses, those who are so wrapped up in the matrix will collapse with it. And what does that look like? From what my understanding is that you'll go through a certain period, perhaps of some kind of torturous reflection of all the experiences and all the things you did for density, and then you'll end up being deleted. Which, in some sense, if you look at it, it's like, well, deletion is actually maybe doing you a favor because you're no longer experiencing the matrix, but you're no longer experiencing anything. You just don't exist. I mean, how's that bad if you don't exist? You just don't exist. So as far as what if you could actually read the question one more time, because there's a couple of parts in there.
Yeah. What happens to density, both physical humanoid and energetic density, when the matrix collapses, in parentheses, the mind?
Oh, okay. Mind. And I did actually, that's the problem sometimes when I listen to these questions, I start to answer them as soon as I hear them. And as far as what existence is, you exist because of the mind, or I was going to say because of the mind. Hmm. Now, as far as like your human, physical body, if you're worried about that, you really shouldn't, because the way that the matrix is set up, the human body is designed to, to fall apart and die. So if you believe in reincarnation, some versions of it, it's not so straightforward that you as a one consciousness had this one experience in this one body, and then you die, and then your single consciousness, goes somewhere, and then they say, oh, okay, we're gonna have you have another experience, or whatever, and then you have this experience. When you go, it's almost like emptying out an apartment building, a cruise ship, whatever you name it. There's a lot of things in people. There's a lot of things in you. So if you get strong with your higher consciousness, you can, in other words, control how those things affect you or try to affect you. If you learn containment, you can contain those things, but understand that the numbers are huge. They're getting smaller, by the way, but they're still pretty sizable. So you think, okay, I'm clear. I got everything. Yeah, think again. Because there are ways that the mind, well, let's say the mind, but the component that is the brain has fail safes to make sure, or try to make sure, that you don't escape the matrix with your mind. That they stick you here. Even if you have a astral projection, 9 times out of 10, you astral project as far as they allow you to. There are those who have done it and say that they see a silver cord. That's literally like the chain that they put on you, like you put on your dog. Keep it from going beyond beyond the fence or beyond the property. That's what the cord is, to keep you from going beyond the matrix. And sometimes folks, they find themselves yanked back into their avatar, into their vehicle. So when it comes to, I say, how the mind works, that's why they replaced the whole concept of the mind with the concept of the brain. So they want you to rely on something that is artificial and say that, I'm having trouble thinking, it's my brain. No, that's not why you're having trouble thinking, really. Well, it could be, but because there's a lot of blocks in there, but there's a lot of walls they put up. But the mind is your whole consciousness. So they'll fragment your higher consciousness to the point where it's kind of weak. It's compartmentalized, as a full consciousness in the universe. You have many abilities, many talents, many skills, but you don't really, think about it in the way that one thinks about it in this world. In this world, you're always trying to prove something to someone. You're trying to impress upon some other individuals. Like you have to prove that you're worth considering. And at worst, if you're a narcissist, you know, you want people to bow down to you, you want everyone to constantly tell you how great you are, how pretty you are, and all this kind of, you know, this is all matrix stuff. In the real, who needs that? We're all beautiful. We're all talented. We're all smart. And we're all creative. And create things and we show it to the others. Not so they say, wow, you're so smart. I said, wow, I like that. Here's what I created. Wow, I like that. Maybe put these things together and create something else. How about that? Someone said, well, I created it and it's all mine and I need some money for it, you know. It doesn't exist that way. It's all about the expansion of supreme consciousness, which everyone is part of. So if I look at my body as supreme consciousness and I have respect for my avatar, I'm going to try to do the best I can to make sure that that avatar is healthy, that you know, the mind that is in the avatar finds things of interest. And because I'm not tuned in or tuned down the way that people are tuned down here, I'm always seeking, because that's what higher consciousness does. It seeks new experiences, new things to share with, literally by sharing with others, you're sharing it with yourself. You're like a cell in the body of supreme consciousness. And supreme consciousness is not about, you know, denigrating any aspect of itself. And, you know, like I'm going to scratch this film or I'm going to, you know, no, there's nothing that is expendable in the supreme consciousness world, because there's no need to even think about being expendable, except for this. Perhaps this was an experiment. Perhaps there's some weird thing that went wrong, and Yenovian decided to hide out and you know, and decide that he's going to go against supreme consciousness. It definitely felt that way, which was a ridiculous, you know, ploy at best. Because this little teeny tiny little grain, barely a grain of sand in a huge ocean of universal consciousness. I'm going to take over everything. It's like, you know, Pinky in the Brain. So if you can ask that question again, just so I make sure I got everything.
And it's 5:02.
5:02? Okay, well, with that, I think I will wrap it up with this last one. But give you food for thought. I hope you all found it interesting. And thank you for coming. I'll talk to you later.
Thank you, Chief.
You're welcome. Bye-bye, everyone.
ขอบคุณค่ะ
Indeed.